Funny thing about betrayal, it never comes from your enemies. No, it's always the people who swear they'd die for you. The ones who look you in the eye and lie so effortlessly you almost admire the performance. Almost. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, watching the messages on my phone with an eerie calm. Some men scream. Some cry. Some beg. Me? I read every messed up word, every promise she made to him, how he was so much more exciting than me, how she couldn't wait to see him again, and I just smiled. Not out of madness, but because I saw something she didn't. A way to make sure she paid for every single word. It started like any other evening. I had just wrapped up a long day at work, exhausted but satisfied. My business was thriving, my investments were secure, and I was on the verge of closing a deal that would set me up for life. I had everything a man could ask for: success, respect, and what I thought was a loyal woman waiting for me at home. That night, she kissed me like nothing was wrong, looked me in the eye, told me she loved me, and maybe she even believed it in the twisted way cheaters do. But I wasn't some clueless fool. I had my suspicions. The late nights, the sudden obsession with her appearance, the way she'd smile at her phone and claim it was just a friend. She thought she was clever. But I've built my career on reading people, on spotting the small inconsistencies that others overlook. And tonight, I had my confirmation. A notification flashed on her laptop while she was in the shower. She had forgotten to turn it off, and there it was, his name. My curiosity wasn't born out of jealousy. It was born out of strategy. I clicked, and there it was. Their entire affair laid out in black and white. I read everything. Every word. Every messed up detail. The cheap motel rooms. The secret meetings. The way she mocked me to him, called me too predictable, said she missed the thrill of being with someone dangerous. That part made me laugh. Dangerous? He was an idiot. A reckless, arrogant moron who thought he was the main character in some forbidden romance. But I wasn't angry. No, anger is impulsive, irrational. What I felt was cold, methodical calculation. I could have stormed into the bathroom, thrown the laptop at her, demanded answers. But why? She'd lie. She'd cry. She'd spin a sob story, act like it just happened, and that it didn't mean anything. I already knew how that script played out. I wasn't going to play that game. She thought she was in control. That was her first mistake. I put the laptop down and walked away, letting the anger settle into something far more useful, a plan. She wanted excitement? Fine. I'd give her the kind of excitement that would leave her begging for the predictability she once mocked. She wanted danger? Good. Because she was about to find out what happens when you cross a man who doesn't just react, but strategizes. This wasn't just about catching her. No, that was too easy. I wanted to make sure her entire world collapsed in on itself. And the best way to do that? Not by confronting her, but by turning her precious little affair into her worst nightmare. I picked up my phone, scrolled through the messages, and smiled. Let's see how loyal your new, dangerous man really is. There's something about routine that makes you feel safe. You wake up in the same bed, next to the same person, drink the same coffee, drive the same route to work. You don't question it. You don't see the cracks forming because they're too small at first, little things that seem insignificant until they aren't. Looking back, I can see them now. The night she rolled away from me in bed, the way she'd stare at her phone, just a second too long before flipping it over. The sudden, almost rehearsed excitement in her voice when I asked about her day, like she was giving a performance instead of an answer. At the time, I chalked it up to stress, to work, to life. Because everything else was perfect. Or at least, that's what I let myself believe. I built a life most men dream of. A successful business, a house that felt like a home, a woman I loved waiting for me at the end of every day. Our mornings were slow, filled with soft touches and sleepy smiles over coffee. She'd steal my shirts to wear around the house, and I'd pretend to be annoyed, just to hear her laugh. She had this way of making even the most mundane things feel special. Like how she'd hum under her breath while cooking, or the way she'd curl up against me on the couch, tracing circles on my arm without even realizing she was doing it. It was effortless, comfortable, a life built on trust. Or so I thought. Weekends were ours. We had our rituals, morning hikes, lazy breakfasts, late-night drives with no destination. She loved spontaneity, or at least she used to. It was one of the things that drew me to her in the first place. She had this energy, this way of making the world feel lighter. And I gave her everything. I made sure she never had to worry about a thing. Bills were paid. The house was in order. She could focus on her dreams, her passions, while I handled the rest. That's what a man does, right? He provides, protects, makes sure his woman is happy. But happiness is a funny thing. You can give someone everything, and it still won't be enough if they don't know how to appreciate it. I remember the night it all started to feel off. We were out at dinner, one of our usual places. She was distracted, her eyes flicking to her phone every few minutes. When I asked if everything was okay, she smiled too quickly, too easily. Yeah, just work stuff. That was the first time I caught the lie, even if I didn't know it yet. Then there were the girls' nights that started happening more frequently. At first, I didn't think much of it. She deserved time with her friends. I encouraged it, but the details never quite added up. She'd come home late, always smelling like a perfume that wasn't hers. Her excuses felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in the mirror before walking through the door. And still, I ignored it. Because trust isn't something you just throw away. But the biggest sign? The one I should have seen coming? She stopped looking at me the way she used to. There was a time when I'd catch her staring at me from across the room, this soft, unspoken affection in her eyes. A look that said, "You're my person." But that look faded. Slowly, subtly. Replaced by something else. Guilt? Indifference? I couldn't place it then, but I see it now. She had already started pulling away, piece by piece, while I was still holding on. And yet, I kept telling myself everything was fine. Because when you love someone, truly love them, you don't immediately assume the worst. You rationalize. You make excuses. You convince yourself that the foundation you built together is strong enough to weather anything. But love doesn't stop betrayal. And trust? Once broken, it never fits back together the same way. It started with a laugh. Not just any laugh, his laugh. I had just walked into the kitchen when I heard it, muffled but distinct, coming from her phone. A deep, confident chuckle. The kind a man gives when he knows he has control. It lasted barely a second before she tapped her screen, silencing it. But that second was enough. She turned around, too quickly, forcing a smile onto her face like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "Hey, babe," she said, voice too light, too casual. "Didn't hear you come in." Liar. I glanced at her phone, now flipped screen down on the counter. My gut tightened. Something was off. Not a flashing red siren, not yet, but a shift. A tiny, almost imperceptible change in the air. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my tone level. I wasn't accusing. Not yet. I just wanted to see how she'd play it. She hesitated. Barely a second, but enough for me to catch it. "Oh, just Sarah." She sent me a funny meme. Another lie. I knew Sarah. Sarah was loud, dramatic, and had the high-pitched laugh of a cartoon character on helium. The sound I heard was none of those things. That was a man's voice. I didn't call her out on it. Not yet. Instead, I just nodded, watching her, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. I saw the way she swallowed, the way her fingers twitched on the counter like she wanted to grab her phone but knew it would look suspicious. Then she did something she never did before. She reached for me, her escape tactic. Sliding her arms around my waist, pressing her body into mine. "You hungry?" she asked, looking up at me with those wide, innocent eyes that used to melt me. I was thinking we could order in, maybe watch a movie. A distraction. Classic. She wanted to redirect my attention. I let her hold me, but I didn't respond right away. Just let my hands rest lightly on her waist, studying her. Was she testing me? Seeing if I'd buy the lie? "Sure," I finally said, keeping my voice calm. "Sounds good." She smiled, too relieved, too grateful, like a woman who had just dodged a bullet. That's when I knew for sure. I didn't have proof, not yet. No pictures, no texts, nothing concrete. But I knew. I could feel it in the space between us, in the way she moved, in the way she chose her words too carefully now. And once you know, once that seed of doubt is planted, it grows. The next few days, I paid attention. Really paid attention. I noticed the way she'd take calls in the other room, speaking in a voice just a little too soft. The way she started locking her phone, something she never used to do. The way she suddenly had to stay late at work more often. But when I casually asked about her projects, she got defensive, stumbling over her answers. Individually, they were small things. But together, they painted a picture. I wasn't just being paranoid. Something was happening. And if she thought she could play me for a fool, she had no idea who she was dealing with. Trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to build, but one small crack and suddenly, everything feels different. I no longer saw her as my wife. I saw a player in a game she thought she was winning. But if she believed she was in control, she had no idea who she was up against. I'm not the kind of man who sits back and waits to be played. If she was hiding something, I would find it. If she was lying, I would expose it. I started with the simplest thing, her phone. It used to be just another object in the house, left carelessly on the counter, on the bed, even in the bathroom while she showered. Now, it was always in her hand or face down on the table. The password had changed. I remembered when she first told it to me, years ago, in passing, in case you ever need it. But now, when I casually picked up her phone, just to hand it to her, she turned so fast it was almost unnatural. "That's personal," she said, her voice a little too sharp. "Personal? We shared everything, our home, our finances, our lives. And now, her phone was suddenly off limits?" I didn't push, didn't ask questions, just nodded like it didn't matter. Let her believe I was still the trusting husband, blind to what was happening right in front of me. Next, her schedule. She was never the type to stay late at work. She didn't chase promotions, didn't bring her job home with her. But suddenly, she was always busy. Long nights at the office, she said. Meetings that didn't exist before. At first, I played along, even offering to bring her dinner like I used to. Every time, she refused. And every time, I watched the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. No, we're all swamped," she'd say. "I already ate. Don't worry." The night she told me she'd be at work until 10, I decided to check for myself. I drove to her office at 9. The parking lot was nearly empty. Her car wasn't there. I didn't text her, didn't call, just left, added it to the growing list of lies. From that moment, I started tracking everything. I noted every excuse, every slip in her story. "Where were you?" "Out with the girls." "Who exactly?" A pause, then a random collection of names. If I asked for a picture, a message, anything to back it up, she laughed. "What, you don't trust me?" "No, not anymore." Then, I took it a step further. She was smart enough to change her phone password, but she wasn't smart enough to realize her laptop was still connected to my account. We had bought it together, and she never bothered unlinking it. She never expected me to check. That was her mistake. I opened it. She hadn't logged out of her messages. And there it was. A name. A man. Conversations that started casually but escalated quickly. Complaints about me. "He's so predictable. I feel like I'm just going through the motions. You make me feel alive again." Word after word, detail after detail. Every meeting, every hotel, every whispered secret. I read it all with a strange kind of calm. Like I wasn't reading about my own life, my own wife. And then, I saved everything. Screenshots. Messages. Every incriminating piece of evidence. I copied them onto a flash drive, stored them somewhere safe. She thought she was keeping secrets. I was about to expose every single one. The truth wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden between the lines, disguised as something innocent. It was right there, staring me in the face, raw and undeniable. I sat in my office, the only light coming from the laptop screen. I had gone through dozens of messages, each one cutting deeper than the last. At first, it was casual, harmless, even flirting, inside jokes, teasing remarks. But the deeper I scrolled, the worse it became. Explicit details, whispered promises, stolen nights in hotels I had never heard of. Dates that lined up perfectly with the night she had told me she was working late or out with the girls. I read the words she had sent him, every syllable dripping with excitement, with desire, with a kind of passion she had convinced me was gone from her life. And the worst part? She wasn't just cheating. She was laughing at me while doing it. "He has no idea," she wrote. "He actually believes I'm working late. I feel bad sometimes, but then I remember how much I miss you, how much I hate going home to him." A man can take many things. He can take struggle, failure, even humiliation. But knowing that the woman you built your life around sees you as nothing more than a fool? That's something else entirely. I scrolled further. Photos. Their hands intertwined on a dinner table, the soft glow of candlelight flickering against their wine glasses. A shot of his car parked outside a hotel, time-stamped at a time she had told me she was staying late with coworkers. A blurry selfie of them together, her head resting against his shoulder, her smile wide and free. A smile I hadn't seen in months. Then came the videos. She had sent them to him late at night, moments when I had thought she was asleep beside me. "I wish you were here," she whispered into the camera. "I can't wait to see you again." I sat back in my chair, my hands resting on the desk, my heart beating steady and controlled. I should have been angry, should have felt a rush of uncontrollable rage, the kind that makes men do reckless, irreversible things. But I didn't. Instead, I felt calm, clear. calculated. There was no confusion now. No doubt. No hoping I had misunderstood. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't something she regretted. This was a carefully crafted lie, a second life she had built right under my nose. And she thought I was too blind to ever see it. I checked the timestamps, cross-referenced the details. Every night she had come home smelling like unfamiliar perfume. Every time she had looked me in the eye and lied through her teeth. I now had proof of exactly where she had been. With whom? Doing what? I closed the laptop, exhaling slowly. If I confronted her now, what would happen? She'd cry. She'd spin a story. She'd say it was a mistake, that she had been lost, that she still loved me. Maybe she'd even try to turn it on me. You weren't there for me. I needed more. I felt neglected. I could already hear the excuses, the desperate attempts to salvage the life she had thrown away. No, that wasn't going to happen. She wasn't going to get the chance to rewrite the story. She had played her game in the shadows, hidden behind lies and secrecy. But I wasn't going to expose her with shouting or accusations. I was going to let her believe she was still winning, right until the moment I destroyed everything. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Found the name of a man I hadn't spoken to in years. A man who owed me a favor. I smiled. Time to make her world crumble. I sat in silence, fingers drumming lightly against the desk. My mind wasn't clouded by anger or blinded by emotions. No, I was past that. I wasn't here to scream or break things. I was here to calculate. She had spent months weaving her deception, carefully crafting her lies, believing she was untouchable. She thought she had it all, the perfect husband funding her comfortable life, and the reckless lover feeding her twisted fantasies. But there was one thing she didn't account for. Me. I had always been predictable to her. The stable one. The provider. The man who never questioned, never doubted. She thought she could lie to my face, and I'd just keep going, none the wiser. She had built her second life under the assumption that I was too blind to ever see it. That was her greatest mistake. Destroying her outright? Too easy. Too crude. A confrontation, a messy breakup, a dramatic exit. That would be giving her an easy way out. She'd cry, beg, maybe even try to twist it around on me. And even if I left her, she'd still have him. No, she needed to lose everything. Not just me, but him too. She needed to be left standing in the wreckage of her own choices, completely alone. So I started thinking, what did she fear the most? It wasn't losing me. That much was obvious. She had risked our marriage without hesitation. But she valued control, the illusion of being the one calling the shots. She lived for the thrill of the affair, the secrecy, the power of getting away with it. What happens to a woman like that when everything is ripped from her hands and she has no escape, no one to run to? That's what I needed to create. The perfect collapse. First, the lover. He thought he was untouchable, the great seducer, the exciting escape from her dull life. I had no doubt she had fed him the usual lies. My marriage is dead. I'm only with him for convenience. I'll leave him soon. Men like him were always arrogant, always convinced they were different. But what happens when he sees the truth? When he realizes she was never planning to leave me? When he starts doubting if she ever really cared about him at all? I already had everything I needed to make that happen. Their messages, their photos, their plans. But I needed to make sure he found out in the most painful way possible. A simple confrontation wouldn't be enough. No, I wanted him to feel like he had been played, like he was just another disposable part of her game. And what better way to do that than to show him she was playing me the same way? I crafted an anonymous message, detached, direct, laced with just the right amount of manipulation. I made it look like it had come from someone inside my wife's circle, a concerned friend who had discovered that she was lying to both of us. I included a few screenshots, ones carefully chosen, ones that painted her as a woman who was simply using him for attention. I timed it perfectly, sending it on a night I knew she wouldn't be with him. Just enough time for the doubt to sink in before she could control the damage. Then I moved on to her. The illusion of security, that was what I needed to break. She still believed she had everything under control, that I was oblivious, that her life would continue without consequence. I needed to make sure she felt that control slipping away, slowly, piece by piece, until she was drowning in uncertainty. First, I distanced myself, subtly. I stopped initiating conversations, stopped responding with warmth. Not enough to make her suspicious, but just enough for her to feel something was off. She was used to having my full attention, used to being able to manipulate situations to her advantage. Now, she was met with silence, with indifference. And I could see it was already working. She started watching me more closely, testing the waters, throwing out small comments to see if I'd bite. You've been quiet lately. Everything okay? I just smiled, gave her nothing, let her wonder. Then, I moved on to the next phase. Money. She didn't realize how much control I had over our finances. She had never cared before, she just assumed the bills were paid, the accounts were stable, the lifestyle she enjoyed would always be there. But I started making small changes. Moving things. Closing accounts she had access to. Freezing credit cards. Redirecting funds. Not all at once, but gradually. Just enough for small inconveniences to start appearing. A declined payment here. A missing transfer there. And when she finally noticed, I'd have an explanation ready, one that sounded logical but didn't quite add up, just enough to keep her paranoid. Let the cracks spread before the house collapses. She wanted excitement? I'd give her a thrill she'd never forget. She thought she had control? I'd show her what it felt like to lose everything. And the best part? She wouldn't even see it coming. The stage was set. Every piece was in place. I had been patient, colder, quieter, letting her feel the shift but not understand why. Letting doubt creep in, letting her second-guess everything. I watched her from a distance, the way her smiles became forced, the way she started checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her eyes flickered with uncertainty when I didn't react the way I used to. She was nervous. Good. She should be. The final blow had to be perfect. Not just an accusation, not just an argument she could twist into something else. No, she needed to be exposed in a way that shattered the web of lies she had carefully built. I wanted her to experience that slow realization, the moment when she understood she had lost everything, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. So I made sure she walked straight into the trap. She had no idea that her lover already suspected her, no idea that the seed of doubt had been planted in his mind days ago. The messages I sent him, disguised as a concerned friend, had done their job well. Men like him don't handle betrayal well. He thought he was the one in control, that she was devoted to him. But now, he was paranoid, angry, waiting for confirmation that she was exactly what I had made her out to be, a manipulator, a liar, a woman who wasn't just betraying her husband, but him as well. I planned the perfect moment. A night out, a dinner at an upscale restaurant we had been to many times before. She had no reason to suspect anything. I had even played my part well, pretending to be the doting husband, suggesting a romantic evening to rekindle things. She took the bait without hesitation. She dressed up, put on her best act, convinced that she still had me fooled. She leaned in close, played the role of the affectionate wife, oblivious to the storm about to hit. And then, right on cue, her lover arrived. I had timed it perfectly, given him just enough information to make sure he would be there, watching. He saw her sitting across from me, laughing, touching my hand, pretending as if she was a devoted, faithful wife. I didn't have to say anything. I just let him come to his own conclusions. The moment he approached, I knew I had one. His voice cut through the air, raw with anger, laced with the bitterness of realization. So this is what you meant when you said you were leaving him? He spat, eyes burning with betrayal. This is the man you said meant nothing to you? Her face went pale. She turned to me, then back to him, mouth opening and closing as she struggled to form a lie, to salvage control. But there was nothing she could say. The trap had closed. The restaurant fell silent. People were staring. Whispers spread like wildfire. She tried to reach for me, but I leaned back, watching her with the same cold calculation I had been holding on to for weeks. You told him you were leaving me? I asked, voice calm, measured. She swallowed hard. It's not like that. Not like what? I cut her off smoothly. Not like you've been lying to both of us. Not like you thought you could play both sides and never get caught. Her lover scoffed, shaking his head. You really had me fooled, he muttered. I thought you actually cared. But you were just using me, weren't you? She turned to him desperately. No, please, let's just talk. You think I want anything to do with you now? He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You made me believe you were trapped in a loveless marriage, that I was different. And all this time, you were playing me just like you were playing him. Her hands trembled. Her carefully constructed reality was collapsing around her, and she had no way out. I leaned in slightly, my voice barely above a whisper but sharp as a knife. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel pity. Not anymore. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away effortlessly, standing up. I tossed a folder onto the table in front of her, printed messages, screenshots, receipts, proof of every lie she had told. You might want to keep that, I said smoothly. A little souvenir of everything you've thrown away. Then, with every eye in the room still on her, With the weight of 2 betrayed men and the judgment of strangers pressing down on her, I walked away. She had nowhere to run, no one left to turn to, and for the first time, she was truly, utterly alone. She sat there frozen, her hands trembling as she flipped through the printed messages, her eyes darting over every word, every incriminating detail. The color drained from her face, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she realized just how deep the trap had been set. She looked up at me, then at him, then back at the folder, as if somehow, some way, she could make it all disappear if she just stared hard enough. But there was no escape. The restaurant was dead silent, save for the murmurs of strangers watching the scene unfold. A few people leaned in, trying to catch every whispered word, their eyes flicking between us like they were watching a play unfold. And she was center stage. Her lips parted, but nothing came out at first. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally forced something out, her voice shaky, broken. It's not what it looks like. I almost laughed. The same tired excuse. The same desperate attempt to rewrite reality. She wasn't used to being powerless, to being caught with nowhere to run. She had spent months controlling the narrative, telling herself that she was the one making the decisions, playing both sides with ease. But now, she was just another liar standing in the wreckage of her own deception. Her lover scoffed, shaking his head in disgust. Not what it looks like. He grabbed the folder from the table, holding up one of the pages. So what? This isn't you? You didn't say all this? You didn't tell me you loved me while you were spending time with him? You didn't tell him you loved him while you were with me? Her entire body flinched at his words, as if they had physically struck her. Her hands clenched into fists on the table, her breathing uneven, her eyes pleading. Please, she whispered, looking at me now. Please, just let me explain. I tilted my head slightly, watching her like she was a stranger, like she was some puzzle I had already solved and lost interest in. Explain what? My voice was calm, devoid of any emotion. That you lied? That you made me believe we had a life together while you ran off behind my back? That you looked me in the eyes every day and told me you loved me while planning your next night with him? I let the words settle, let her feel their weight. No, there's nothing left to explain. Tears welled up in her eyes now, the panic setting in. She wasn't in control anymore. She couldn't manipulate her way out of this, couldn't twist the story to make herself the victim. The people watching weren't on her side. No one was. I made a mistake, she choked out, shaking her head, reaching for my hand like that would somehow undo everything. I wasn't thinking. I was just lost. Lost, I repeated, arching a brow. You weren't lost when you were planning hotel meetups. You weren't lost when you were laughing at me in your messages. You weren't lost when you were sneaking around behind my back and making a joke out of our marriage. Her lip trembled. She was unraveling, the weight of her own choices crushing her, and for the first time, I saw what true helplessness looked like on her face. She had walked into this thinking she had 2 men wrapped around her finger. Now, she had neither. Her lover shoved the folder back onto the table, shaking his head in disgust. You told me he was boring, he spat. You told me he didn't make you feel alive. But look at you now. You're nothing without him, are you? That hit her hard, because it was true. She had built her world around control over me, control over him, control over the story she had convinced herself was real. But now it was crumbling, and she had nothing to hold on to. I stood up, buttoning my jacket with slow precision, as if I had all the time in the world. I already moved my money, I said casually. You won't see a dime. Your accounts? Closed. Your name? Removed. This life you were so tired of. I leaned in slightly, just enough for her to see the finality in my eyes. It's gone, and I'm not the one who threw it away. Her breath hitched. That was the moment it truly sank in. Not just the exposure, not just the humiliation, but the loss. The realization that this wasn't just a fight, not just an argument she could win back with time and apologies. This was final. Wait, she whispered, her voice barely audible now, thick with desperation. Wait, please, don't do this. We can fix it, But I was already walking away. Her lover followed, muttering something under his breath, leaving her there alone at the table, eyes darting around as if she had just woken up in the middle of a nightmare she couldn't escape from. She had played her game well, but I had played it better. And now? Now, she had nothing left but regret. I walked away that night and never looked back. But she had to live in the ruins of what she had built. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. The restaurant scene had been enough to set everything in motion. Word spread fast. Her carefully curated image, the devoted wife, the woman who had it all, was gone in an instant. By the next day, people were talking. Friends, family, coworkers. The whispers followed her everywhere. She had always loved attention, always thrived on being admired, being the center of every conversation. But now, every room she walked into was filled with stares and hushed voices. Her friends, at least, the ones she thought were friends, were the first to distance themselves. Some were disgusted. Others just didn't want to be associated with the kind of scandal she had brought on herself. No one respects a woman who gets caught cheating so publicly. Even the ones who might have defended her before stayed silent. Who would want to stand up for someone who had been exposed in such a brutal, undeniable way? Her family wasn't much better. I had been close with them, closer than she ever was, if I was being honest. Her parents had always respected me, always told her she was lucky to have a man who took care of her the way I did. When they found out, they were furious, not at me, but at her. Her mother called me, voice tight with shame, apologizing over and over, as if she had been the one who betrayed me. Her father? He didn't say much, just muttered something about how he had raised her better than this and hung up. She tried to control the damage. I knew she would. She had always been a survivor, always someone who could talk her way out of anything. But this? There was no talking her way out of this. Every excuse she tried to make sounded hollow. She couldn't lie when the proof was there in black and white. When the people she had once confided in now only saw her as a cheater, a liar, a woman who had thrown away a life most people could only dream of. Then came her career. She had built herself up in her field, had spent years cultivating the perfect professional reputation. But a reputation is fragile, especially when you work in an industry built on connections, on respect, on trust. I never had to say a word to anyone at her job. But scandals have a way of spreading on their own. Her boss, her colleagues, some of whom had been at that restaurant that night, started treating her differently. The subtle shift in tone, the emails that were suddenly less friendly, the meetings she was quietly excluded from. It wasn't long before she was given the talk. We just don't think you're the right fit for this company anymore. She had built her career on perception, and now that perception was tainted. No one wanted to be the one to defend her. No one wanted to risk their own reputation by being too closely associated with her. And the best part? Her lover, the man she had thrown everything away for, wasn't there to catch her when she fell. After that night, he disappeared, blocked her number, cut all ties. He had been humiliated just as much as she had been exposed as a fool in front of a room full of strangers. And men like him? They don't handle losing well. He had never loved her. She was just a thrill, a stolen secret, a game. And now that the game had ended, so had his interest. She tried to reach out to me. Of course she did. First, it was the apologies, the desperate messages about how she had made a mistake, how she would do anything to fix it. Then, when I didn't respond, the anger came. The accusations. The gaslighting attempts. You set me up. You wanted to humiliate me. You always had to be in control. She was right about one thing. I was in control. I had let her believe she was winning. Let her think she was getting away with everything. Let her walk deeper into the trap until there was no way out. Now, she had nothing. I, on the other hand, had everything. My life, my success, my freedom, and peace. Peace in knowing that I didn't just leave, I won. She had spent months lying to me, manipulating me, thinking she was smarter, thinking she was untouchable. But in the end, I was the one who walked away untouched. Life has a way of balancing itself out. You put in the work, you stay loyal, you build something real, and if the other person values it, you both thrive. But when someone takes that trust and spits on it, when they gamble with everything you built together and assume they'll never have to pay the price, that's when life reminds them that every action has consequences. I walked away from that wreckage untouched, but she was left to sift through the ruins. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she tried to rebuild, tried to salvage what little dignity she had left, but it never quite worked. The world had seen her for what she was now. Not the strong, independent woman she had always pretended to be, not the irresistible thrill-seeker she thought she was in her affair. Just a liar who lost everything because she overplayed her hand. She had no safety net, no job, no friends, no family who wanted to hear her sob stories, and definitely no lover to run to. He had abandoned her the moment he realized she wasn't worth the trouble. I imagined the moment it finally hit her, that cold, sinking feeling in her stomach when she realized she had nothing left. that everything she had once taken for granted was gone. But me? I thrived. Without her dead weight, I focused on myself, my business, my goals, my future. I traveled, I met new people, I lived. I didn't waste time being bitter, because what was there to be bitter about? I had one. She had tried to betray me, to use me, to turn me into a fool. Instead, she became the fool, and I walked away from the whole thing stronger than ever. The best revenge? Moving on and living a life so good that they hate themselves for losing it. So now, I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have walked away quietly? Or would you have made sure they felt the consequences of their choices the way I did? Because in the end, justice isn't about anger or revenge. It's about making sure they can never escape the truth of what they did.